Imagine being the most powerful man on Earth, losing it all, and then, against all odds, staging one of the most incredible comebacks in history. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. The final, explosive chapter of Napoleon Bonaparte's career, a period known as the 100 Days. So let's get our terms straight. The 100 Days is actually a bit of a misnomer. It was really a 117-day saga. It kicks off the second Napoleon steps back into Paris after his escape and ends when the old monarchy is put back in charge. It was a whirlwind that would, no joke, reshape the map of Europe forever. And this all leads to a question that sounds, well, it sounds impossible. How does a man who was a defeated emperor, exiled on a tiny island, manage to march all the way to Paris and reclaim his throne without a single battle? It seriously sounds like something out of a movie, but it actually happened. Okay, so our story starts on Elba, this little island off the coast of Italy. For about 11 months, Napoleon was supposed to be in a forced retirement. But let's be real, this is Napoleon we're talking about. He wasn't just relaxing. He was watching, he was waiting, and he was listening to every bit of gossip coming out of France. And what he was hearing was basically the recipe for a perfect storm. Back in France, nobody liked the new king. His own legendary army veterans. These are the guys who conquered a continent, remember? Were being treated with total contempt. And, meanwhile, over at the Congress of Vienna, the major European powers were so busy arguing over who gets what that they took their eyes off the ball. For Napoleon, this was a golden opportunity. So on February 26, 1815, he made his move. With just 600 loyal guys, he literally just slipped past his guards, hopped on a ship, and set off on one of the boldest gambles in history. His destination? France. What happens next is just a masterclass in the power of personality. The second Napoleon lands, the king in Paris sends troops to arrest him. Now, logically, this should be the end of the story right here. But it wasn't. Faced with a line of royal soldiers, all of them aiming their guns right at him, Napoleon just walks forward, all by himself, throws open his coat, and yells this incredible line. He was literally betting his life on his own legend. And the result? It was insane. The soldiers lowered their guns and started shouting, "Long live the Emperor!" We're talking about 6,000 men, led by Marshal Ney, the very same general who had promised the king he'd bring Napoleon back in an iron cage. Instead, he and his entire army joined him on the spot. From there, it was like a snowball effect. As he marched to Paris, his tiny group of followers just grew and grew into a massive army. One town after another just opened its gates to him. By the time he strolled into the capital on March 20th, the king had already packed his bags and fled. Napoleon had taken back France with nothing but charisma. But, getting the throne back was actually the easy part. Now he had to keep it. And he was facing huge problems from a France that had changed and a Europe that was absolutely furious. And this created a massive dilemma for him. See, at his core, Napoleon was an autocrat, a my way or the highway kind of ruler. But he came back to a France that now wanted things like liberty and a constitutional government. So he was forced to play the part of a liberal king, a role he was just not built for. He even said it himself. This quote makes it sound like he knew things had to be different. Or at least he knew what he had to say to get people on his side. But his instincts for total control were always simmering right below the surface. So while Napoleon was dealing with all this internal politics, the bigwigs over in Vienna immediately stopped all their bickering. His return gave them one single clear mission: get rid of Napoleon, for good. They declared him an outlaw and formed what's called the Seventh Coalition, a giant military alliance designed to crush him. And this wasn't just some angry letter. The four main powers, we're talking Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, each promised to send 150,000 soldiers. That is an overwhelming force. Napoleon knew his only shot was to hit them before they could get organized. Yeah, he knew he couldn't just sit around and wait for all those armies to march on France. His only real hope was to launch a surprise attack into Belgium, trying to knock out the British and Prussian armies before the others could even get there. And this decision, of course, leads to one of the most famous battles in the history of the world. The plan was pure Napoleon, a classic divide and conquer. He wanted to drive his army like a wedge right between the British, led by the Duke of Wellington, and the Prussians. If he could keep them from teaming up, he figured he could beat them one at a time. It was a brilliant, high-risk, high-reward strategy. But on June 18, 1815, on a soggy, muddy field in Belgium, that gamble failed. The Battle of Waterloo was the end of the road. So what happened? Well, it was a deadly mix of things. It had rained heavily the night before, which turned the whole battlefield into a mud pit and delayed Napoleon's attack for hours. Then Wellington's troops just stubbornly refused to break. And finally, late in the day, the Prussians showed up and crashed into his flank. His whole strategy of keeping them apart had totally collapsed. Just 3 days after the battle, Napoleon was back in Paris, but that triumphant feeling from his return? Gone. Now there was just shock and despair. He wasn't the savior of France anymore. He was just a defeated man who had lost his final, massive bet. His own brother tried to convince him to dissolve the government, make himself a dictator, and keep fighting. But Napoleon knew it was over. His reply says it all. I have already dared too much. The ultimate gambler finally had to admit that his luck had run out. The end came really fast after that. 4 days after Waterloo, he abdicated. A few weeks later, he surrendered himself to the British, hoping they might let him live in England. No such luck. They exiled him to Saint Helena, a lonely, windswept rock in the middle of the South Atlantic, where he died about 6 years later. And that leaves us with the big, lingering question of the 100 Days, the one that really gets to the heart of his legacy. Was this a heroic final stand to save France and restore its glory? Or was it just a monumental act of ego that dragged all of Europe back into war and cost tens of thousands of lives, all for one man's ambition? That's the question his final gamble leaves us to wrestle with.